All right, so let me introduce to you Saurabh Parkash from State Farm. He's a lead data engineer at State Farm. And then next we have Dr. Mark Albert, and he's a professor in the computer science department. We have Dr. Sahar Behpour, and she was a student of ours. She graduated from the information science PhD program, and now she's at Deloitte and doing data science. And then you just met Dr. Feng, and here he is again, and he's also with the computer science department. You met this morning Shad Griffin, and he's with IBM as a distinguished data scientist. The first question we have goes to Sahar. What is ethical AI, and why is it important?
Okay, so you've been exposed to the topic of ethical AI, and here's some keywords about that. But what if I ask you, what if I told you that AI can make life and death decision, and we even don't know whether or not this decision are correct? Or in another example, imagine you're walking down the streets and a cop stops you, and not only you have done anything wrong, but because an AI facial recognition algorithm has identified you as a suspect. So these are a few examples. And also one more thing which I like to, it makes more sense for our students, is about resume reader systems. So how do you feel if your resume or your application gets rejected, and only because of the bias that might be in a resume reading system of companies? So these are a few of the examples that shows the importance of the ethical AI. I think as artificial intelligence become impactful in the world, ethical AI is becoming incredibly important to be discussed and to invest time and fundings on that. So the ethical AI topic, conversation and concerns about that, started in 1950 and 1960, and with the concern about artificial intelligence systems becoming too intelligent that surpass human intelligence. And that continued until 2000, that we are seeing different frameworks and different rules and guidelines for that. Basically, in one sentence, ethical AI is a set of guidelines and principles that different industries, different companies or organizations have put together to provide researchers and basically everyone in the field of AI to follow them. And there's not a universal framework that works across different contexts or different countries or industries, but there's still some components in these frameworks that all researchers can follow and can be useful for them.
Thank you, Sahar. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which is for Saurabh. Saurabh, who is responsible for establishing and enforcing the ethical standards for artificial intelligence systems?
So regarding it's a mutual effort, and the mutual effort between the government, the regulation, and the industry. And from an industry perspective, I'm already seeing most of the industries who are in the AI space have a new role of Chief Ethical Officer. And that office works closely with the CDO, that's the Chief Data Officer office. And basically, there are governance patterns that are and governance standards that are set up with that office, and that are passed on to the developers and the engineers and the scientists who are working on these AI models. And also, there are different boards that are set up between the organization to basically help with the regulation of the ethics in the AI space. So it's a combination of government, combination of developers, combination of all the people who are working in, like in critical data spaces. So
Okay, thank you. And we're coming back to you, Sahar. This is your question. What are the components of a universal ethical AI framework?
As I already mentioned, there's not a universal framework yet, but different organizations such as IEEE, Global Initiative, and European Commission for Ethical AI, and IBM Ethical AI, and different other frameworks are developed and proposed to different, researchers in the field of AI. But there are, as far as I learned, there are 6 components that can be considered for any ethical AI related issue that researchers can work on them. One of them is transparency, and the other one, fairness and bias mitigation, privacy and protection, and accountability and responsibility, human oversight, and sociological and environmental impact. What I want here to emphasize to our students in data science is that, like when I was a student, I was not exposed to this topic a lot. It was just like I tried to build model, and one time that I started creating a model for multi-class classification of some legal documentations, I realized that I'm getting a really good performance, but I knew that there's a bias, something like name bias. I started Googling and learning about that and asking faculties, but I never learned this bias that I'm finding is only one component of all different components under the big umbrella of ethical AI. So what I like you all to consider or recommend you, like our students, is to map each of these components. I read them here from my notebook because I didn't memorize them. I have some of them in my mind when I work, but you all can consider some components according to your projects. And it depends, like each project can you can consider different components, not all of them, and map them to each data science or data life cycle. For example, from data collection, data generation, pre-processing, preparation, and going to modeling, visualization, and even when you report, there should be some consideration of ethical AI for each of these steps. So map these components with the data science projects that you do, each step. And that's how you are always aware of like considering ethical AI in your projects.
Okay, thank you. You touched on some of the same points that were touched on in the keynote speech this morning. So
Okay.
good review of that. And we're coming back to you, Saurabh. How feasible would it be to develop data ethics regulations?
We live in a world where if you see the top companies that are generating high revenue are all customer focused, and customer data is taken very seriously by all these organizations. And basically the organizations that are making the most profits are basically the organization who are using data and privacy of the customer seriously, and not using data to their advantage, but basically helping customers to reach to a point where the customers are getting the advantage with their products. So the product is very critical for every company, and the data is also very critical for a company. So it's quite feasible to basically have ethics in the data space. So, yep.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to move on to Shad, Shad of IBM. As far as potential negative consequences of AI go, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that scares me, and there's been a lot of talk today about, chat GPT and all these new technologies in the natural language processing space is, we saw firsthand 7 or 8 years ago how a handful of people could get into social media platforms and have a small number of people could have a huge impact by getting into social media platforms and influencing people. What scares me is what if these people, handful of people, can suddenly, instead of one of them interacting with these social media platforms, build chatbots to interact with these social media platforms. That scares me because it's an order of magnitude that can increase their impact by an order of magnitude. In general, when it comes to ethics, I think a lot of it falls on us. We need better oversight. We need better from the government. We need corporate oversight. But ultimately, as data scientists, the AI we put into the world, we have to make sure not only is it effective, but is it just? And I think that's a question that we should all be asking ourselves. And my colleague here from USAA nailed it. A lot of times these algorithms, sometimes it's okay to lose a little bit of accuracy and performance to be fair.
Okay, thank you. And you kind of touched on this, but you mentioned regulations, but how can organizations like IBM ensure that their AI is ethical?
Well, there's all kinds of, they've been mentioned earlier. IBM has standards and platforms and things that they can do. And, I think it makes sense to have at a C level to have somebody who's responsible for that. Somebody who's going to own that for the organization, especially organizations that are heavily into AI. I think that needs to come from the C level. And I also think there needs to be policies and procedures around that and, codes of conduct. But like I said earlier, it also comes down to us as data scientists. We make this stuff. It's our job to make AI. We need to make sure that AI is just and fair.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to head over to Dr. Albert now with his question. With deep learning AI systems, it can be difficult to determine how or why a decision is made without significant additional effort. How do we trust AI systems when their reasoning is opaque compared to people?
So first of all, I think it's important to have a little bit of balance here because people are actually more opaque in some complex decision making, right? Ask a person for their choice of house or their choice of spouse or the reason they picked a job, and you'll actually find some deep psychology where those decisions are not always what they directly tell you. So there's a little bit of a smearing going on in terms of understanding that people aren't, when they explain their decision, sometimes it's not clear, that's why they make the decision. On the flip side, with these deep learning models, there are, intricate techniques in order to determine what's happening within the model, within different layers of the model and so on. But in general, the way you would approach a lot of validating, the way that you would approach the efficacy and the choice of these models is a lot of the ways that you would approach understanding complex decision-making from people. You would give them many, many examples over a series of time, and then you would observe, the mistakes that they make and try to improve that. So for example, some of my work, I'm direct the biomedical AI lab, and we do things like surgical prediction for children with cerebral palsy, funding effort for that. And of course, you wouldn't ever rely directly on the model right now. It's always to inform a surgeon as part of the process. But when you're training a surgeon, you're going through a series of steps in order to make sure that what they're doing is proper, even if they can't perfectly explain everything they do. And it sort of falls, into the same approach of trying to make sure these deep learning models are appropriate. With enough varied validation efforts across not just a data set that happens to be convenient, but a data set across sites, you can begin to trust it a bit more.
Okay, thanks. We're going to go a little bit more specific now with the question, Dr. Feng. We're going to talk about ChatGPT. In a programming context, will the use of ChatGPT change the definition of cheating? For example, looking up answers on Google, now considered a normal part of programming practice during technical interviews.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so based on my understanding, the definition of cheating will be changed because of the advance of the AI, like ChatGPT. For current job, most of the job, I think, for the programming interview, the candidate must know how to program. But because of the ChatGPT and other kind of the generative large language model, like the DART, which is just released yesterday by Google. So people may change the definition of cheating. For example, I would like to share a story, I discussed in another panel discussion hosted by Mark about 1 month ago. So at that time, we are talking about what we should teach for students in computer science and the student in like information science or other kind of the majors. So I said 100 years ago, the first car was invented. At that time, we must train 2 roles. One is mechanic, the other one is driver. So in the programming interview, if we are testing interviewing the driver, I don't think using ChatGPT will be treated as cheating. But if we are interviewing mechanic, the candidate must know how it works, why it works, when it goes wrong, how to get it fixed. So I think it is how we define cheating will be changed along with the advance of the AI.
Okay, thank you. And Saurabh, I believe you also wanted to answer this question.
So ChatGPT is changing our world. So I'll give you an example. I've been in the United States from last 15 years, and I needed some help writing a resume. At this point, I used ChatGPT, and the answers that I got about myself surprised me, what I got from ChatGPT, which talked about like all the stress that comes into coming as an international student. It started from there, and how like basically I advanced in my career and did data for like 20 years. And it talked in a way which was very expressive, and I shared it with my colleagues. And basically, I shouldn't say it loud, but that's the best resume I've ever seen. And I was amazed like what I've achieved. So to put it in
Okay.
perspective.
Well, thank you for being honest. Okay, and we're going to go back to you, Dr. Feng. How can the issue of deep fake content online be managed and resolved? I guess this is kind of similar to what Shad was talking about before. I don't know.
So actually, deepfake is an image generative model. It means that it can generate some fake faces. So it has already caused a lot of chaos online. Means a lot of fake news. They are using the fake images to make it very challenging to detect the misinformation or something like that. Actually, the big techs like Amazon and the Google, they have enforced some policy that if a developer want to use their online cloud computing to train deep fake model, it's not allowed it. So it means that it's not just I think it's not just the responsibility of the big company, big techs. I think the individual and even the government, everyone should work together to make sure the AI is designed and used for social good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're coming back to you, Dr. Albert. To avoid being sexist or racist in AI systems, many people believe removing sex or race from the information used in decision-making can be helpful. Why is this not as helpful as it might seem in complex AI systems?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons that issue came up is I taught an automated discrimination course, and one of the things if you're trying to address that kind of bias in these complex models, yeah, I mean, the first thing would be, well, try to blind the model in terms of these issues that might cause bias. However, what we know is that with these deep learning models, their ability to infer latent information So if you don't provide sex, if you don't provide race, they're able to infer those pretty easily from what we might think of as information that you wouldn't be able to, like a person might not be able to, but enough information collected, collected over time and that seems innocuous in those regards, it can be inferred. And essentially then it's fair game for the model to use, even though you're not providing it directly. In order to address that, one of the difficulties is, then you have to start getting into the complexities of these deep learning models and how to, see if that's, the extent to which that's being inferred, and see if you can sort of unbias the system. There's many different ways of trying to remove that bias. It can include changing the amount of data or the weight of data that's involved if you want to be agnostic to the way the system works. Or it can actually be looking at the internals of it and trying to observe what portions of the network are responsible for certain inferences. I think that it's not a one approach, fits all. I'd like to always bring the analogy back to the way you would address it with people. I mean, there's a lot of similar strategies to addressing what they're exposed to, but also trying to make sure that their internal model, you just directly discuss it with them. And yeah, even though the tools may be more complicated for deep learning models, I think it's important for people going out there to be equipped with these approaches.
Okay, thank you so much. We've run up to the end of our program at 3 p.m., but I'd like to give at least a couple students a chance to ask a couple questions. So if anyone has a burning question that you'd like to ask the panel, I'm not going to finish the questions that we devised, but does anyone have a question you'd like to ask based on the topics they've discussed? Here we go.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Agbachi. I'm a PhD student in the information science department. I have a very concerning question to ask the panelists. And I don't know who's going to answer this first, but I will just throw it out there. So with the use of generative AI tools, specifically like ChatGPT, do you think it is ethical enough for users to continue using that, knowing that that might affect their information searching behavior? I'll give you an example. I go to ChatGPT, I write a text, gives me back a feedback. I don't know how that is being generated. I don't know the source is coming from. Would that, in a way, which I know it will, affect my information search behavior over time? Because it means I will keep relying on that very AI tool over time. I might not even have that effrontery to ask my next neighbor a question anymore because I so much depend on that. So what are those ethical issues you think we should put together, not just industry-wise, not just in companies, but I mean, we should talk about this even going to the grassroots. So how do we deal with those fundamental issues that makes us humans and that makes us to feel like we shouldn't give our whole intelligence to depending on an AI tool? Thank you.
You want to raise your hand if you'd like to answer? Oh, okay, Shad, thank you.
I think the answer is, to me anyway, is we just don't know. I struggle with this a lot with my with kids, with something, with like an iPhone. I mean, what is this doing to their brain? I mean, there wasn't any long-term studies of the impact of an iPhone when they introduced the iPhone. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these things are going to change how we live and how we interact with each other, and what is that going to do to us? I don't know. And it's one of those things that it's kind of scary, really. I mean, like my kids, I kind of come to the point where they're going to grow up and they're going to be adults, and they're going to be different. They're just going to be different because they don't know what it's like to not have the internet in their pocket.
Okay, thank you. Did you also want to say something, Dr. Albert?
Yeah, and also, there's, the flip side of this is and the analogy would be like calculators coming out, right? I mean, when calculators come out, we no longer can do mental math as well anymore, but I don't know about you. I don't even open a calculator app anymore. It's Google search bar, or you just type it in there. There's you get used to the tools, and then you have to ask yourself, as the tools get more ubiquitous. I mean, in some cases, I mean, like the movie Her, where you're talking to your AI. I mean, aren't we a lot closer to that? Where it's conversational and so on. So I mean, there's a scary part to it, but then there's also like what, talking about it changes the nature of what it means to be human. I mean, long story short, I mean, I think everything is getting more connected. What does it mean? I think that's a tough question. What does it mean? But I don't think it's necessarily scary.